What's up, guys? We had a 1-0 day yesterday. The only play on the San Francisco Giants won, and a first 5 inning wager on that one I think would have been a push, 1-1. I think it was the score after 5. I think the Red Sox tied it up in the bottom of the 4th or the 5th or something, and then it actually came down to the bullpens, and the Giants actually were able to win in that department. But I'll take the win, man. I think it was the right side. And we had, unfortunately, the NBA, what I thought was the strongest play yesterday was the Indiana Pacers, especially at the point where the line dropped down to 6 because it was announced that the Bucks were actually going to play Damian Lillard. So at that point, it became like a reverse injured player type of situation, even though it's like, well, the Bucks, I mean, their playoff lives are on the line. So it's not like they're going to get totally complacent, but they still might have that aspect to it where it's like, we're feeling like pretty good about ourselves because we won in a blowout without Lillard. So now that he's coming back, it's like almost instinctively you almost like take your foot off the gas a little bit. The line dropped, giving extra value on the Pacers a little bit there. So at that point, probably I should have come in on the Pacers, laying the points after it dropped to 6 because of that. And of course, the Pacers did win quite easily. So congratulations to the Indiana Pacers. They have advanced. And congratulations to their next opponent, the New York Knicks, who also advanced in a crazy series where it looked like Philadelphia had made another ridiculous comeback, which was the 3rd time in the series that the Knicks had blown like a lead of several points within the final minute or so. It basically happened again last night, and all of a sudden it's a tied game, but the Knicks are actually able to then hit a 3-pointer, very timely 3-pointer that was really what won the game at that point. Crazy series there. So congratulations to those two teams. They have both advanced. Moving on to today, we'll talk NHL quickly. My only plays today are all going to be on this huge Friday baseball card. I don't have anything in the NHL games today. They're interesting games. Dallas returns to Vegas now for Game 6 after Dallas has now won 3 games in a row in the series to take a 3-2 lead, and arguably they should have won Game 1 as well. They played better in Game 1. They've been the better team in the series, but in this spot, I'm not so sure. They're down from -115 to -110. They got 60% of the tickets, only 59% of the cash. So it looks like there is reverse line movement against a public road favorite Dallas team now. Is the public back on the Dallas train for sure after seeing what they've done the last few games? This one I actually would lean to Vegas a little bit, just lean with the market there. Even though Dallas has been the better team in the series, and it wouldn't shock me if they won here, but you maybe have other aspects of play in some of these series where the league, I said the refs in the past, but I really meant like the league, especially in the NBA, kind of has a little bit of an incentive to want to keep that series going, which maybe helped the Sixers last night. I don't know. I mean, it was maybe the reason why the Lakers had that huge free throw discrepancy against Denver in that final game. I don't know, but the market read here would be to the Vegas side to bounce back after 3 straight losses, but Dallas is the better team, and the odds makers are telling you they are, lining them as a road favorite. Vancouver and Nashville, this is a 3-2 series as well, where Nashville was able to extend the series with a road win, I believe. This is now Game 6 with Vancouver leading 3-2. Going back to Nashville for Game 6, Nashville has flipped from +110 to -126, it looks like. I don't know if that opener is accurate. If Vancouver would have actually opened a road favorite here, that wouldn't really totally make sense to me. The -126 seems about in line with where Nashville has been at home in the other games in the series. Nashville, 61% of the tickets on them, but only 56% of the cash, too. So it looks like Nashville is actually a little bit of the public side here with a little bit less of the cash on them, even though according to pregame here with that market move, it looks like the line has moved in the Nashville direction, but I don't think that what they list as the opener is actually correct, because I don't know where they even get that. It's kind of like a consensus opener. Sometimes it's not actually accurate. It might come from like 1 or 2 books or something that are the first ones to open, and maybe it opened somewhere else at like almost all the other books, so it might not be like a totally legitimate opener. So you might not know if that huge move to the Nashville side is really actually that legitimate. This one is tougher to gauge, man. Based on the market read there with the cash discrepancy, it would it would indicate slightly towards the Vancouver side, but Nashville has been the better team in the series, man. Nashville had that complete implosion in one of the home games where I was on Nashville in that game. They were up 3-1 with 3 minutes left in regulation and lost that game, so they should have won that game. And in one of the first two games in Vancouver, they actually outplayed Vancouver, and they were winning 2-1 late in that particular game. So this could be a completely different series. Nashville could have already won the series, really. I think Nashville's actually been the better team in the series, so I wouldn't really want to go against them here. It's tough to read both of those games, man. And Nashville, of course, they're at home with their playoff lives on the line, but you're laying a little bit of a price with them as a home favorite, but it's not a very steep price with them. NBA, there are two games today as well. Cavs Magic return to Orlando for Game 6. This is a 3-2 series lead for the Cavs now. The home team has won every single game in the series. The most recent game was the only game where the home team didn't also cover, which is unfortunate for me. The Cavs had opportunities to cover in that one, and the Magic still hung around. Magic in this one are up from 3.5 to 4. They have 65% of the cash on them, but 57% of the tickets on the other side on the Cavs. So slightly public Cavs. It looks like public coming in a bit on the Cavs again, thinking, the Cavs, seeing that they won the most recent game, I guess, and the Cavs are the better team. And the Cavs, I agree, they're the slightly better team, and they have more experience, but the Magic have just been dominant at home, man. And not just in this series, but like all season, really. They've been a much, much better home team. And the biggest lopsided results in the series have been the two games in Orlando. That Orlando won by like 30-something and 20-something. So I would not want to go against the Magic here. I would lean to the Magic in this one. This has all the makings of like a 7-game type of series here. The totals drop from 203 to 199, juice to the over, with 50% of the tickets split both on the over and the under, and 59% of the cash on the under. So looks like some legitimate movement coming in on the under, but I think you've kind of missed that boat because it's dropped almost 4 points now from where it opened. It's one of these series, as it gets towards the end, you kind of expect more intense defense. This has been a defensive series too, but the games in Orlando have been the higher scoring games in the series. So I would not really want to have an under ticket in this one, even though it does look like the line is moved that way, especially not at the worst number. Strongest play in this one, I think, would be to the Magic side, just because they've been so dominant at home. And it looks like another spot where maybe they'll make adjustments, but I think it's not as strong as playing the Magic in Game 3 was, because they were coming off 2 double-digit losses, and now they're coming off such a close loss, a close game. It's a little bit of a different situation, but this is still Orlando, very good home team. So I think Orlando would be the right side in that one. And then Clippers, Mavs. Mavs have taken a 3-2 lead in that series. Mavs at home really have incentive to try to close this out. They don't want to have to go back to LA. Mavs are an 8-point favorite at home now. 64% of the tickets on the other side on the Clippers. Public still coming in thinking James Harden and company. Harden, Westbrook, who else do they have? Paul George, whatever. Thinking that this team is maybe being undervalued in the market, getting 8 points, thinking that 8 is too big. I don't know, man. This indicates that Kawhi Leonard is not playing in this game. The Mavs would not be this big a favorite otherwise. I think with him in, the Mavs are like a 4.5-point home favorite or something like that in the other games. It kind of looks like almost kind of like what the Pacers series was last night. It just looks like this is going to be a closeout game for the Mavs. And I kind of do lean to them to win by margin as well. Sitting in an 8-point favorite here right now, like I said, it seems like the public thinks that line is too big in what on the surface looks like a close matchup. But Kawhi Leonard is a key component for the Clippers, man. I mean, he's one of the most playoff experienced players in the league, really. I mean, I think he has a championship, right? I think there was some weird year where Toronto won a championship when he was on their team. He has a championship under his belt. I think he was on the Spurs as well, right? When they made some runs. So I don't even know how many championships that guy has, but he is a very playoff experienced player. He's a very good defensive player, and he really has an impact on the Clippers, actually more dramatic than like any of these other injuries do, even probably more than the Giannis injury. I think Kawhi Leonard is the most impactful injury out of all the teams and players in the playoffs. So out of the Clippers, they just may be done, man. They're just, as I said, they're a very inconsistent team. They're kind of just a mess. The Mavs seem to be the more consistent team, and they have that 1-2 punch, of course, Luka and Kyrie. But of course, everybody knows that. But the Mavs have just been the better team in the series. They've been the more consistent team. The odds makers are telling you what to think here, really, that they're telling you the Mavs. I mean, they're making the Mavs a big favorite for a reason here. So I lean to the both home favorites in those NBA games. Not exactly something I totally want to play in those, though. And the Clippers Mavs have dropped on the total from 208 to 207.5. 54% of the tickets on the over, but 85% of the cash looks like it's on the over. So it looks like the cash discrepancy actually on the over, even though the line is ticked down. That one is a really tough total to read, man. The total in that series is we've seen some different outcomes in that total, I think. Very hard to gauge, I think. With Kawhi Leonard out, that means the Clippers are going to be much worse defensively. So does that mean that the over is the better play? Possibly. I don't know. Especially, I don't know, maybe if it gets into a spot where it just sort of becomes a game where like the defense doesn't wind up mattering anymore. You might see easy buckets towards the end. But then again, games that tend to go over actually could be those games where you get like tons of fouls at the end and the refs are just like prolonging the game, like that Sixers Knicks game last night. Although that game went over probably with about 4 minutes left in the game. So I don't know. Moving to the MLB, I do have a few plays in Major League Baseball here. This is one of those, it's a Friday, man, so you get a full MLB card, and you get a lot of series where teams are like returning home from road trips, and you have teams that played yesterday, against teams that didn't play yesterday, which I think is kind of an advantage to those teams that didn't play yesterday. There are certain teams where I would kind of lean against them in certain ways. Like, I don't know, you have teams returning home from road trips. I think the Dodgers are returning home from a long road trip, a 3-series road trip that took them to Washington and then Toronto. And then they played the Diamondbacks, which is still a pretty big divisional series. Dodgers actually were able to exact revenge on Arizona for Arizona knocking them out of the playoffs last year. So the Dodgers are returning home from a road trip and possibly in a letdown spot coming off of that win, the revenge series win over Arizona. But they are playing Atlanta, who's one of the best teams in baseball. So if you're going to still be focused on any team upon returning home, it could be when you're facing Atlanta, man. So I'm not going to quite get there fading the LA Dodgers there, although I do agree with the Atlanta side. Gavin Stone, I think, is actually the worst pitcher in that matchup, too, even though I tend to like the younger pitchers. Gavin Stone, I would want nothing to do with him, but I also don't really want to have anything to do with Charlie Morton either. This one, the Dodgers are public, but they're down from -115 to -112, so they're not a very strong home favorite here, especially for a Dodger team. So the public probably going to come in on the Dodgers, thinking it's a cheap price, although they know the Braves are also one of the best teams in baseball. 67% of the tickets on the Dodgers, but 88% of the cash looks like it's on the Dodgers. But I think it's a bad spot for the Dodgers. So, again, I lean to Atlanta. Charlie Morton actually has decent stats against the Dodgers, I think, lifetime. And I don't think the same can be said for Stone against the Braves. And Stone's stats are certainly much worse, even though I tend to not like these like older pitchers there. And then Oakland is also returning home from a road trip, I believe. Or no, they're not. Excuse me. They already did. They've already been at home, but they're coming off a sweep of the Pirates. But actually, I think the Marlins are in the worst spot here. This is what I was thinking. The Marlins played an extra inning game yesterday and won against Colorado, whereas Oakland was off yesterday. So Oakland, the more rested team for sure, and Oakland's staying at home, where Miami now has to travel all the way out to the West Coast. And that's going to be one of those games where you're going from East Coast to West Coast after an extra inning game with no time off. You have to go out to the West Coast, and it's that like jarring like time zone change where now you're playing a 9:40 p.m. game Eastern, so the game's going to end like around midnight your time. That really kind of messes with your biological clock. It's one of the worst spots in sports, really. You have to go east to west with no time off like that and have to play at a game that's much later than what you're used to biologically. So I think it's a pretty bad spot for Miami, actually. And Ryan Weathers is pitching for Miami, and he is a really, really terrible pitcher. I'm sorry. His stats this year are just awful. There's nothing to like about Weathers. So I would lean to the Oakland side there. I think situationally it sets up nicely for Oakland. The One problem I have is that Oakland has never seen Weathers before, and he is still kind of a young guy, so it's possible. And Oakland's lineup is weak, so it is possible that Oakland struggles to score runs in this game. So I don't love it. I like a few of these other plays more strongly than I like this one. Oakland has J.P. Sears going to the mound, and he's been the much better pitcher this season between him and Weathers, but Sears over his career has not been very good, man. So there are some things, like looking at the stats this year, yeah, I mean, it looks like Sears is certainly the better pitcher here. I think it's actually a little bit debatable. I don't think either pitcher is that good. And I said we were going to see a regression from Sears. He did have a regression in his most recent game after that big start that he had against the team that got rid of him, the Yankees. He did not have a good performance against Baltimore, giving up 3 home runs, 7 earned runs against Baltimore, but he had an 8-1 strikeout walk ratio, so that was actually still good. So most of it was the home runs that he allowed. So maybe I'm wrong, and maybe Sears is just actually becoming a better pitcher. I don't know, because he's still young as well. Weathers, I think, is the younger of the two. Sears is still somewhat young, but yeah, that game's a little bit tougher to gauge for me, so I just can't really quite get involved there in that one. So those are like the couple of teams returning home from road. And Washington, I think, is also returning home from a road trip. They were in Miami and then Texas, so it's not the longest road trip, and it only took them one time zone over into the Central, although Texas, kind of a big series, I guess. I mean, facing the returning champs. So Washington's coming off of that, playing Texas. They lost the series, though, and they did lose pretty badly in the 2 losses. So it is mostly a bad spot. I do lean to Toronto in this one, and Patrick Corbin is pitching for Washington. He has bad stats this year. I think he's been pretty much lit up by these Toronto hitters, and Toronto has Kikuchi pitching, who I think is better. He's just the better of these 2 pitchers, and Corbin not very good. Kikuchi has been pretty good this season. It's good stats this season, and Washington's barely seen him before, and the couple guys who've seen him before only have 1 hit off of him. So Toronto does seem like it's the correct side in that game as well. And Toronto's staying at home, trying to bounce back off of kind of an ugly losing series to Kansas City. So I do like the Toronto side in that one, actually. Or actually, excuse me, Toronto's starting a road trip. So that's actually even better in some cases, where Toronto gets to leave home now after that ugly series and kind of forget about it. But Toronto does appear to be a pretty big public road favorite in that one. So I don't love it as much. And Oakland is also a public home favorite. Oakland minus 130 has 76% of the tickets on them, 72% of the cash. Toronto minus 172 on the road now, up from minus 170, and they have 73% of the tickets, only 70% of the cash. So the market read on both of them kind of keeps me away from both of those a little bit as well. Gives me a little bit of hesitation on both of those, whereas the market read on the games that I'm on, I think, looks a little bit better to me than these other games. I think. Hopefully I wind up being right. Hopefully the market, like sometimes the market like completely changes in some of these baseball games where they're not heavy volume really, especially when it's like during NBA, NHL playoffs, especially NBA playoffs. But there aren't that many NBA or NHL games, so it is a stacked like baseball card here. So you could still see the public coming in and playing some of these baseball games here. It is that time of season or that time of year, but baseball just tends to be a lower volume betting sport, really. So you can see these market percentages shift more dramatically during the day. So I never like to see that. Like I saw with the Reds the other day, the market completely flipped on that one, and indicating that there were professional bettors in disagreement with me on that one. I'm like, oh, shit, like, that's not good. All right, the games that I'm on today, I'm on 3 of these games. One's going to be this weird earlier start time at 6:10 p.m. in Cincinnati, which is actually, is Cincinnati Central? I don't even know. They're Central time zone? No, I guess they're still East. I don't even know, man. I don't know what goes on. I think they're still Eastern, because that would be really weird playing at 5:10. There is an afternoon game between Milwaukee and Chicago, which is an interesting divisional matchup, but I don't think either pitcher in that game is that enticing. Cincinnati, this is going to be one of 2 teams that are actually returning home from road trips, or I'm actually going to play on the team returning home from a road trip, and I think we have actually good reason to do so, which is usually not the case. But Cincinnati, yes, they're returning home from a road trip that took them to Texas and then out to San Diego, so I don't love that, the fact that they went out to the West Coast and now they're returning to the East Coast. If it was just Central time zone, I think this would be a little bit better, because I always say when a team's returning home, which is why I was talking about those other return home spots, when a team is returning home from a road trip, they tend to be distracted, man. They have family life to get back to, and it tends to not be the best spot. But there are certain spots where I think it's less bad. And that's if the road trip was a little bit less long, which this Cincinnati one was only 2 series. They did go out to the West Coast, so I don't love that aspect of it. They lost the last 2 games out at San Diego, so maybe that will have them like refocus a little bit. But usually when a team, even if they lose on the road trip, usually the road trip return angle isn't actually very good. And this one is one of those spots where Cincinnati's actually the underdog too. And underdogs returning home from road trips are usually lose in baseball. It's usually a strong play to go against them. But there are things about this specific spot and matchup where I think Cincinnati is going to be the play here, even though they are returning home from a road trip. They have a day off. They didn't play yesterday, whereas Baltimore finished a series against the Yankees yesterday. And now, yes, they're starting a road trip, and usually starting a road trip is a good spot for a team because you get to just leave home. If you're winning at home, you kind of take that momentum out on the road with you. If you've just lost at home, you tend to just like get away from those losses, get out on the road. It tends to be a spot where you focus on baseball, but this is one spot where a team is starting a road trip and they might actually not be totally focused on it, because look at what Baltimore's coming off of, man. They played yesterday where Cincinnati did not, and they beat the Yankees. That's a huge divisional series. They actually leapfrogged the Yankees in the division. They went into the series behind the Yankees in the division. Now they're ahead of the Yankees, and they're atop the AL East after taking 3 of 4 from the Yankees and winning yesterday pretty decisively, 7-2. So Baltimore could be in a big letdown spot, man. And Bradish didn't go that far into that game, so Baltimore had to use their bullpen. And they used 4 relievers yesterday in a game that definitely mattered, trying to beat the Yankees, a big divisional matchup there. So while Baltimore was doing all that, Cincinnati had the day off. So maybe they used that to get some of those home things out of the way upon their return home. So I think that makes this a better spot for Cincinnati. This makes it a bad spot for Baltimore, man. Baltimore's in a letdown spot. Cincinnati's in the better rest spot. And then, of course, the pitching matchup. Looking at I've talked about both of these pitchers before, and you know which one of these pitchers I like better, man. You have Cole Irvin going for Baltimore, and upon just the average recreation of better, if they look at this, they're going to see that these players, the 2 pitchers, have similar ERAs on the season, both in the 3s. Irvin 3.49, but looking at his WHIP, man, 1.24. That's a little bit high. It's worse than Hunter Green's for Cincinnati. So that's one indicator kind of against it. But Irvin, also the older pitcher. And look at the rest of his stats this season, man. He's coming off 2 shutout performances in a row, which has driven his ERA down. And it was against Kansas City, Kansas City's playing better than we expected. But, are they that great? A hitting team? I'm not really sure. And then against Oakland, who was definitely a weak offensive team. So I'm not as impressed by those as I would be if they were against better teams. But he did have 2 shutout performances in those, although still it was only a 7-2 strikeout walk rate over those 2 games. So his strikeout numbers are not very good. Prior to that, he struggled over the season, giving up 4, 5, and 2 earned runs, and didn't even go 5 innings in that 3rd game. He went only 5 in the first 2. And he hasn't faced exactly the best lineups this season yet either. So Cincinnati is going to be one of the better hitting teams that he's faced this season so far. So that would give me a little bit of hesitation on Irvin. That makes this not look that great for Irvin either. He also only has 18 strikeouts and 28 in the 3rd. It's kind of a red flag when a guy doesn't have a great strikeout rate, and he has an 18-7 strikeout walk rate. So the number of walks isn't that horrible, but his strikeout rate is low enough that he's not like one of these dominant pitchers. So I don't love that about it. And over his career, he's been a starter across the last 3 seasons for Oakland and for Baltimore. And Oakland more of a pitcher-friendly park, too. And his stats just haven't really been that great. They were pretty good in 2022, but then he kind of took a step back again with Baltimore last year. Over his career, 4.36 ERA, 1.28 WHIP. Nothing to really love about that. Only 374 strikeouts and 510 in the 3rd innings. Not a strikeout pitcher. Really doesn't come in and gas guys. He's got that didn't sound right. Doesn't come in and throw high heat there and get these guys to whiff. Oh God. And then he's got 120 walks, which is a bit high as well in those innings. 3.1 strikeout walk rate. So I mean, actually, I guess the number of walks isn't really that high, but still, the number of strikeouts is pretty low, man. So Irvin, not the best pitcher. He's kind of just like a mediocre pitcher, really. Doesn't strike guys out very much. He's just kind of okay, really. And he's a 30-year-old at this point. I like Hunter Green a lot better, man. Green only 24. And I've been saying, man, looking at Green's insane strikeout numbers, that I keep saying this guy's going to turn it on at some point. And his stats early in his career are not indicative of how good he is. Although even in his first season in 2022, his whip was only 1.21. So that actually wasn't that bad. 4.44 ERA that season should have probably been lower than it was. He had a worse season last year with a 1.42 whip, which wasn't good at all. He walked way too many guys. 4.82 ERA last year. You got to keep those walk numbers down, man, if you're Hunter Green. This year, he has been doing that so far, though. His strikeout numbers have been insane across his entire career. 272 and a third innings pitched, 358 strikeouts. Way, way more than 9 strikeouts per 9 innings, 108 walks. That is very high, but his strikeout numbers are so high. It's a 3.3 strikeout walk rate. Does have a 4.49 ERA in his career, 1.28 whip. So those numbers are a bit too high. But he's trending in the right direction, man. Whereas Irvin, I think, is just kind of a junk kind of control pitcher. Hunter Green actually has like real strikeout stuff, man. Those strikeout numbers are just totally crazy. And this year, his numbers are a lot better than his stats over his entire career. Speaking of shutouts, he threw a shutout in his previous game, and that was a one-hit 7-inning performance with 6 strikeouts against Texas, who was a much better lineup. He's been kind of dealing this season, man. He's gone at least 6 innings in all but 2 starts, and one of them was his first start against Washington. Yeah, you can kind of just throw that out. And Washington actually has been hitting a little bit better than you'd expect out of them. Other than that, and then a start where he only went 4 innings against Seattle for some reason, even though he only allowed 1 run. I guess he threw too many pitches, 98. And that one, other than that, he's gone at least 6 in all 4 of the other starts. He has a 42-12 strikeout walk rate. So, again, too many walks, but so many strikeouts, man. In 34 and 2/3 innings, huge strikeout rate again, and only 26 hits allowed. So, he has been fairly unhittable. Not allowing many hits. So I like all that for Hunter Green, man. And then looking at these pitcher stats, I forgot to look at these pitcher stats against the opposing hitters. So Green, very good strikeout numbers. And then this year, he only has a 1.1 whip. So even though he has a 3.63 ERA, so looking at just these pitchers' ERAs, you might think Irvin might be the slightly better pitcher, but Green has way better strikeout numbers and a way better whip at 1.10. So that's all better. And then up against Baltimore's hitters, oh, yeah, Baltimore's never faced Hunter Green before, so he has that advantage as well. So I think you have a lot of edges here for the Cincinnati Reds here. As I always say, these young pitchers who actually have really good stuff like this, especially guys who can strike guys out, these opposing hitters tend to struggle against them the first time through, first couple times through, even if they haven't seen that starting pitcher before. So everything I just said, yeah, that's going to put me on Hunter Green, on Cincinnati in this one, on the Cincinnati Reds. And Cole Irvin, by the way, his numbers against Cincinnati in his career, they haven't seen him much, but they're 6 for 16 off him lifetime. 6 of their hitters have seen him before. 6 for 16. He only has 1 strikeout off against them, although no extra base hits, but still 375 opponent batting average and a 750 OPS, which is a little bit high. So Irvin has been seen before. He's the worst of the 2 pitchers, and the Reds hitters have decent stats against him in that limited sample size. So for all those reasons, man, it's going to be a play on the Cincinnati Reds, and I think you can still get them at an underdog price at home. So going against the fact that they are returning home from a road trip, all those other things that I just said about it, like, put me on Cincinnati here, man. And I'll talk about the market in a second too. Cincinnati, you can get them at plus 100, I think, at some spots still right now. It looks like the line's moving in my direction, though. So Baltimore in this one this is an interleague game. Baltimore, it looks like they flipped actually from plus 100 to minus 110 as a road favorite. I'm not sure that they actually open at plus 100. I don't see that anywhere. I just see the line kind of moving down because they were at minus 115 at one point. Baltimore, the public team, and why not? They're leading the AL East now, and they just beat the Yankees 3 out of 4, so they're going to be the public team. They got 71% of the tickets on them, but 52% of the cash over on the other side on Cincinnati, man. So it looks like professional money. There's a pros versus Joes situation here going on in the market. Looks like the professional money's coming in on Cincinnati, and they know that Green is the better pitcher here. So I will agree with that, or the market is in agreement with me at least, which is good to see. So I'll be on that one. Cincinnati Reds. Another one that I'm on is going to be another team that's returning home from a road trip, and this is a weird 6:50 Eastern start time. So both of my games here on the sides are starting before 7 p.m. Eastern, which is weird. I'm going to be on the Tampa Bay Rays, even though they're returning home from a road trip. They've ticked up from minus 125 to minus 128. It looks like most of the money lines are in the minus 130s now. 53% of the tickets on Tampa. So the public not really on Tampa because they're playing the Mets. I think the Mets actually might have the better record out of these two teams right now this season because the Mets went on a nice hot streak. Yeah, Tampa's below 500. Mets are above 500. So the public might be coming in and not really wanting to play Tampa here very much, thinking, oh, we're getting an underdog price on the Mets here who have the better record. Let's take the Mets. I disagree with that, even though both Tampa and Cincinnati are returning home from road trips, man. So that does worry me slightly, but everything else about these matchups puts me on these two as like what I think are decently strong plays, man. And the market seems to be in agreement as well. So Tampa, what was I going to say? Yeah, they have 53% of tickets on them, but they have 75% of the cash. So it looks like more of the bigger money is actually coming in on the Tampa side right now, and it's driving the number up a bit. I think maybe the way that you could play this is to grab one of those DraftKings run lines instead of laying the 135 as the price gets a little bit steeper there. You can lay the Tampa -1 on the run line right now, plus 108. It just means that if they win by exactly one, your bet's going to push instead of winning it. But the price is kind of more enticing there, being able to take that actually at an underdog price there. So Tampa, yeah, let's look at that real quickly. Tampa's returning home from a road trip, which I don't love. But again, this one's only a 2-series road trip, and it only took them into the Central Time Zone. And they lost 5 out of 6 of the games on the road trip against the White Sox. They got swept. And then I actually took Tampa coming off that sweep because that was just embarrassing to get swept by a White Sox team that had 3 wins on the season coming into that series and won all 3 against Tampa to double their season win total. Ridiculous. And Tampa did win the first game against Milwaukee, but this is a good Milwaukee team, man. And Tampa lost both of the other 2 games pretty badly in that series. So, yeah, I mean, Tampa's returning over from road trips. Even if you lose those games on the road trip, it is a bad distraction spot, as I've said. But I think it does mitigate it somewhat if you lost really badly in those last couple of games and you have a day off, which Tampa does. So Tampa didn't play yesterday. So this is another thing I like about this play here. So Tampa had the day off, whereas the Mets, they did not have the day off. And they're coming out of a pretty big battle of the Metro area series here between the Mets and the Cubs, the New York-Chicago series. Usually a pretty big series, man. That was a series that they split, and the Mets won yesterday 7-6 on a walk-off in the 11th inning. So they beat the Cubs in dramatic fashion to split the series and get above 500, and the Cubs have been playing well this season too. So that was a pretty big win for the Mets there and just won dramatically, and it was in extra innings, and the Mets had to use a bunch of their relievers in that game. They used 5 of their relief pitchers. So their bullpen has been used, man. They used 5 relief pitchers yesterday in a big game, a big win, while Tampa was just off for the day yesterday. So just like with Cincinnati, Tampa is a team that had yesterday off, and they're facing a team that played and finishing off a big series yesterday. So facing a team that could be in a letdown spot. And even though it is a team that is starting a road trip in both of those cases, still it looks like it could be a letdown spot, man, for both Baltimore and for the Mets here. And I think it's a pitching matchup advantage, which I'll get to in a minute, for the team that I'm going to be on as well. So it just doesn't look good for either of those teams, man. And what else was I going to say? Yeah, so the Mets, they played an 11-inning game yesterday, just winning in a walk-off. It doesn't get more dramatic than that. So it does seem like it's going to be a bit of a letdown spot. Now going to Tampa, where you play a Tampa team that just really has not been playing well. Quintana is on the mound for the Mets, and I don't like Quintana, man. His ERA makes him look like he's the better pitcher in this game because he has a 3.48 ERA this season, which is better than Savale for Tampa, but he's got a 1.34 whip, man. So I always say you got to look at that whip. He's been putting too many men on base. He's not a good strikeout guy. He's old. He's 35. He's a junk pitcher. I've picked my spots to go against him, and he's kind of like alternated good and bad starts this season, and this would be one of the bad starts if he does continue alternating. He had a bad start against San Francisco 2 starts ago, or I think I might have won on the Mets in that one. I forget. Maybe I did. I don't remember. Or I won on San Francisco, in that one. I can't remember. I think maybe I did. And then he had a good performance, 8 innings and went 9. So he hasn't been going deep into these games, that's for sure. But he's thrown way too many pitches, man. He went 8 innings in that most recent game, only allowing 1 run against St. Louis, which is good. But he only struck out 3. And he's been throwing like huge pitch counts in all of his starts, but he's only gone like 5 innings in basically every other start besides that one. He just has not gone that deep. He's racked up a high pitch total early on. In 2 of those starts, he had 100 pitches before he was done with the 6th inning. So he's throwing too many pitches too early in games, man. And you can see why. He has 15 walks in 33 2/3. That's not good. That's way too many walks. 23 strikeouts. So not a good strikeout rate, but he seems to be not having the best like command either. And he did have similar stats last year. His ERA was in the 3s for the Mets, but his whip was way too high again, and he walked too many guys. Wasn't a great strikeout guy, so he is continuing that. So it's just crazy that he can do this and not allow these runs to score because he's putting too many men on base, man. I think at some point it's got to catch up with him. And then up against Tampa's hitters, let me see here. There it is. Tampa, it's a small-ish sample size. They have 6 hitters who have seen him before, and one of them is Zach Eflin, a pitcher, so we can kind of throw that out. But he's 1 for 2 off him, but if you include him in there, Tampa is 9 for 18 off him lifetime. So either way, it's a 500 batting average, 3 doubles are the only extra base hits, but 500 batting average against him. He does have a 4-1 strikeout walk ratio against him, but still 500 batting average for Tampa's hitters against him in a small sample size, but they have been able to hit him, and they've been able to get on base off him a bit, and they have a 1,193 OPS off him, so that's quite a high OPS. So Tampa's hitters have done well against Quintana. And on the other side, I think Savale, you're getting the better pitcher out of the 2, man, in Savale. So you're getting Tampa in a better situational spot other than the fact that it's a return home. Savale, his whip isn't good this year. It's 1.31, but it's still actually better than Quintana's. His ERA makes him look significantly worse with a 5.06 ERA, but I think that's a little bit misleading. He's coming off 2 bad starts, but one of them was against the Yankees, man, and that was a start where he walked 5 guys. Other than that, his walk numbers have been incredibly low this year. The Yankees, they're one of the best hitting teams in baseball, so I don't think you can really blame him for that. But then he came out of that start, and he had a bad start against a bad White Sox team, so that was a really bad start. But I think that means he might kind of bounce back from that. So that was his other really bad start. Before those 2, every start this season, he'd allowed 3 or fewer, and in 3 of them, he'd allowed 2 or fewer earned runs. So he was pitching pretty well for the most part. Still, his strikeout and walk ratio is really good this season, 34-9 in 32 innings. So strikeout rate pretty high. That's good. He's the younger guy in his late 20s. I like all that. That strikeout walk ratio indicates to me that he's pitching better than what we see out of his ERA and his whip. He's allowed 6 home runs, which is kind of skyrocketing his ERA a bit. You can't allow that many home runs, man, but over his career, his numbers are definitely much better than what we've seen. Since he's been on Tampa, he's actually regressed, which I don't love because maybe that means like there's something with the pitching staff or the environment that's just worse. His numbers last year were similar to what they are this season, so that scares me a little bit. It's like Quintana and Savale both, like their numbers this season look like a continuation of last season with the same team, which kind of scares me a little bit as far as this game is concerned, but I just think that looking at their overall numbers, Savale is the better of the 2 pitchers. Over his career, he does have a 1.17 whip. I always say ERA, whip, which is much better than Quintana's, I think. And he's the younger guy. 3.99 ERA career, so it's still below 4. 462 strikeouts and 507 1/3 is a decent strikeout rate, although it's below average, I guess, but it's not horrible. And 127 walks is not very many. So he does keep those walk numbers down for a 3.6 strikeout walk ratio there. And up against, who are we facing here? Up against, who's Tampa even playing here? Oh, God, I already forget. The Mets. Up against the Mets have very limited time against him. Only 4 of their hitters have ever seen him before, and they're 2 for 12 off him lifetime with no extra base hits. 2 walks, though, and 1 strikeout, but still, it's a very low 167 batting average against Savali. Limited playing time for sure, but that's a low batting average and only a 500 OPS. So his stats against the opposing hitters are better as well. So I will be on Tampa Bay, as I said, on the run line, and that one I think is better. And then to close it out, I'm going to be on an under. Full game total under. This is a game between 2 teams that didn't play yesterday, and I like how this pitching matchup sets up. Even though Arizona is involved in this game, they are coming off a big series against the Dodgers, so it could be a letdown spot, but I think the starting pitching matchup kind of calls for this one here. This is San Diego and Arizona. I think these pitchers might be flying a bit under the radar, which is why we're getting a total that might be a little bit too high here. It's dropped from 8.5 juice to the over on the open down to just a straight 8.5. So you can actually get under 8.5 minus 105 right now. I think it reduced juice at some places. Does look like the over is public, 83% of the tickets, but it does look like a lot of the cash is also on the over at 86%, but it is still a public over, and that cash discrepancy might switch a little bit. That might not be indicative of where like the bigger money actually is, because we have seen in some books the total actually opened higher, juice to the over, and dropped down a little bit. So it looks like there is some market movement towards the under here, even though this does say the cash percentage is on the over right now. I'm not sure that's going to wind up still being accurate there. And I don't know if I actually explicitly said, oh man, I'm losing my mind here. Can't even talk this early in the morning. Tampa does have the cash discrepancy on them, and the other play that I was on, Cincinnati, also does, for now at least. But on this under here, I just like this, man. San Diego, Arizona, both off yesterday. Even though Arizona's coming out of that big series, yeah, sure. They did lose 8-0 in that game, though. San Diego coming out of whatever, a series over the Reds where they won the last 2. I don't think it matters. I think both teams are going to be like ready for this. It's a divisional game, and it's all about the pitching matchup here, man. So you have both bullpens intact because they didn't play yesterday. And Dylan Cease is pitching for San Diego. He's still a young guy in his late 20s. He's been pitching pretty well this season, although his walk numbers are too high at 14 and 35 2/3. He has 40 strikeouts, which is a high strikeout rate. And he's only allowed 17 hits. So he's been one of the most unhittable pitchers in baseball, really. That's crazy that he's allowed fewer than half a hit per inning pitched so far, which is really ridiculous. More than double the amount of innings pitched than the hits allowed. You never see something like that, man. It's just his walk numbers are just way too high, which has kind of been the case on his career. He has a 1.28 career whip, 3.78 ERA, but those numbers aren't that bad. The whip is a little bit high. The ERA is good, but he's had insane strikeout stats, 832 and 693 and 2/3 innings. 308 walks is way too high, though, for a 2.7 strikeout walk ratio. But his strikeout ability is so high, man, that I'm going to just roll with Cease. And this year, he's been a bit better. 0.87 whip this year, but that's because he's allowed so few hits. His walk numbers have still been awful. 2.78 ERA, but still, I like the fact that he's been so unhittable. And the Diamondbacks hitters haven't been very good against him in a decent sample size. 7 for 33, 8 strikeouts, 2 walks, 1 extra base hit, which is a double. It's a 212 batting average and a pretty low 500 OPS. So good stats against Arizona's hitters, so I like that. And then on the other side, from Cease, we have Slade Ciccone, very young guy, younger than Cease. These are both young guns, man. He made his debut last year. He made 4 starts last year, 3 bullpen appearances, and this year 2 starts so far. Over that in his career, 3.69 ERA, 0.95 whip. So those stats are good. 0.5 whip this year in 2 starts, 2.25 ERA. So he's been pitching well so far. His strikeout numbers aren't as good. Over his career, 31 and 39 innings, but only 5 walks. So he has good control, man. He has not walked a lot of guys. It's an 11-1 strikeout walk rate this year, and he had an 8-1 strikeout walk rate in his most recent game against Seattle, only allowing 3 hits. He's only allowed 5 hits in 12 innings pitched so far. So, and only 2 and 1 earned runs in those 1 earned run in those starts. So he's been dealing, man. His stats have been really good this season so far. Both of these pitchers have been almost unhittable this year. And Jock Peterson is the only hitter on the Diamondbacks team who's ever faced him before, and he's 0 for 2 off him. So that's it, man. That's going to do it for me. Those plays one more time. Cincinnati Reds plus 100. Tampa Bay on the run line. The Rays -1 at plus 108. And San Diego, Arizona under 8.5 minus 105. Peace.